Hi, everybody. My name's Steve Werhoftig, and a little disclaimer, I am not a historical scholar by any means. I'm an amateur at this sort of thing. That's my first disclaimer. My second one is that we're going to be talking about the history of Darlington Corners, our little village, our only really little village that we've had in Westtown, and some related topics. And the challenge there is that there's not a lot of information about that aspect of Westtown. It's all over the place in the History Center, in the New York Times, in the Philadelphia Inquirer, in Delaware papers, and over at the county building, in bits and pieces. A lot of the information is contradictory. You'll see one date, and then you'll see something declare it was a different date. I even found that in our own published history book, I came up with a couple of errors that we have in there based on some updated information. So I would say that this is 88% pure. Not quite as good as ivory soap, but I hope that you enjoy it. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about Darlington's Corners, and what we'll find out a little bit later on is that even the term Darlington's Corners is controversial, and there are historians out there who argue about what that name really should be and why that name even occurs. We have a well-known, what we call the Darlington Inn on the corner, Billy's Corner, down at 202 and Street Road, and we will find out that it actually should not be called Darlington Inn at this point. It's just that that's the name that of all the names the place has had, that's the one that we decided to keep for now. But technically, that isn't the name. So Darlington's Corner is the name is over 100 years old. And I forgot my pointer, but I'll point with my finger. So as you can see in very old maps from the 1800s, it denotes where Darlington's Corners is. And you can see on the map, it shows that Darlington's Corners is in Westtown. However, the U.S. Department of the Interior feels that we are still called Darlington Corner. So to this day, that is still, as far as the government is concerned, that's still what that corner is named. However, they think that it's in Thornbury, which is the picture on the right, rather than in Westtown. If you go to Zillow and say, I want a home in Darlington's Corners, it gives them to you. And it'll give you a list of pretty expensive homes. You can see there's one there for $1.8 million. So not too shabby for Darlington Corners, although if you actually look at the addresses, I think many of you might argue that that's not what you would consider the Darlington's Corners. But in the old days, the notion of where Darlington's Corners was watch that. So it's still called that to this day on maps. And when in the old days, people thought of Darlington Corners as one of the main stops in between Westchester and Wilmington. And by that, perhaps a stop would be a village. Maybe it would be a group of stores. And you'll see how we're also related a bit to Dilworthtown. Thank you. Okay, let's have the next slide. So Wilmington, Delaware has long been a very, very important um, uh, port and city in this area. And so, as you can see from the map on the left, there was a lot of interest in developing roadways that would take you from Westchester down to Wilmington. And Wilmington uh, uh, was home of the DuPont gunpowder works. They made many different chemicals, but their big money really came from explosives and gunpowders, and that was established in 1802. The DuPonts came here from France as Huguenots running away from the French Revolution. And so that's why they established their business there, and they found that that was a great place to export from. So since you can export from there, and that meant that since there was a growing community up in Westchester, that you needed to get up this road, which at the time was called Wilmington Road. It wasn't called Wilmington Pike until much later on, until it cost money to travel on. So, like the turnpike. So, along the Wilmington Road, some different communities began being established because, as you can imagine, in those days, that was a very long ride, and you needed a place to stop and have a drink, have something to eat, to buy stuff, etc. So the next slide shows one of the main stops just south of us, which was Dilworthtown. Dilworthtown is quite a bit older than Darlington's Corners. It was established around 1750. That's how old the Dilworthtown Inn is. And that photo is, I think, from around 1930. It's a very old photo. And it's quite well known because of its association with the Brandywine battlefield and the Brandywine battle. Good morning. And um, it when you talk to Americans about it, they say, "Oh, well, that was where Washington directed his retreat." You know, isn't all that notable, but that's what we say. If you talk to the British, they'll say, "Oh, yeah, that's where that's what the British, we took over that building, and that's where we put our prisoners until we were ready to transfer them," which is indeed what they did. Dilworthtown was established by James Dilworth of the Dilworth family, and it was made up of several buildings that had all different kinds of businesses and restaurants and taverns associated with it, many of which are still here. One notable thing about Dilworthtown is that supposedly Dilworthtown, good morning, Dilworthtown had the very first pear tree anywhere in the counties here. The pear tree, for some reason, was loved and was notable, and was often decorated with blue glass, which was a very popular kind of decoration in those days. Because of the blue glass hanging from the pear tree, we got the Blue Pear Inn. That's why that received that name. And many of you probably know that that has recently reopened as the Pear. So once again, we have a little place out there. Unfortunately, the Dilworthtown Inn, which at one time was notable as having one of the finest collections of wine on the East Coast of the United States. But it had fallen into disuse, disrepair, perhaps related to taxes being owed and things like that. So there are many reports all the time of it coming back, but we'll have to wait and see. The pear, the Blue Pear, now called the Pear, that's their new logo, and the painting above it is of the victorious British having a wonderful time as the prisoners were downstairs waiting to be transferred. Okay, next. So this is an image of current Darlington's Crossroads. You can see on the upper left, that's where the Darlington Inn is. That's Quabilly Farm. Across the street, just south of it, is where currently the CVS pharmacy is. Across from that is the Lukoil gas station and that very old building, which is the Britton House. And then back up to where we currently have the Amish market. And what's interesting about that to me is that that corner and the corner just south of it had been key local markets forever, for well over 100 years. One market or another existed there in all kinds of forms. And for whatever reason, that we never let go of that. Westtown always wanted to have a place to go and buy our vegetables and milk and stuff locally, and that remains the case to this day. But over time, the people who made big investments in Darlington's Corners moved their businesses all over the place. You can see in the history that it was almost like a little checkerboard for them, which is, well, this blacksmith shop is getting too big. I need to put a factory in that building. I'm going to put it across the street because what's the difference? And to them, Thornbury, townships meant nothing to them. They're rich guys doing this business. I'm just going to move things back and forth. And that's why they felt that calling, well, you'll find out that somebody who felt it should be called Darlington's Corners decided the whole thing could be called that way. Next slide. Shows, let me see if I'm, yep, okay. So this is the history of that inn that's on the corner there that will soon be owned by your township, by Westtown Township. It began as a log cabin, and as a log cabin, it became a tavern. It was built as a tavern and went through two different names. One was the sign of Count Pulaski, who was known as an imported heroic general of the Revolutionary War, and then the sign of the King of Prussia. So all over the place, we hear about the King of Prussia. King of Prussia was Frederick the Great, who signed the Treaty of Commerce with the United States. And the reason why Americans loved the King of Prussia is because he was the first notable foreigner of power to recognize America. So by signing that treaty, he was saying, yeah, that's a country, and I'm going to sign an agreement with that country and treat them as if they are an actual country. And so many Americans felt that was so important to finally be recognized by someone other than France that we named things after them all over the place. As you can see, over the years, it changed to it got built as a serpentine building. There from 1930, you can see they're using that green stone that came out of the quarry over on New Street, and it once had a little porch on it. And at that point, it was called the Darlington Tavern. Then more recently, that porch went away. It got surrounded by a lot of trees. It's a little hard to see now. You could also see from the names of the place, it went from Darlington's Tavern to Westtown Inn to Darlington's Corner Hotel, because at one point we'll find a little later on, it lost its liquor license, and kind of the whole township lost its liquor license, and we'll find out why that happened. And then in 1908, the owners decided to turn it into a private residence, and to this day, it is a rented private residence. Next slide. This just shows the people, kind of stern looking guys that we named the place after. And The inn itself doesn't look that different today than it did back in 1930, or even very different from the 1800s. Next slide. So the reason why that was an ideal place for the inn is that in the early 1800s, there was a great deal of business transferring sheep and cattle from the Lancaster area to Philadelphia. And in order to do that, you couldn't do that in a day. You had to take several days to do it. And you got a business. Your business was being on the road. Which meant that next to and behind what is now Westtown Inn was a pen for livestock. Because when you went and rented your room, you also had to rent space for your livestock to sit out there so that next morning you can get them and take them into Philadelphia. That's an 1800s painting of what an inn might have looked like. And obviously, home brewed ales was a very big part. Someday in the future, perhaps, we know that. But there's a little talk about ice. How many here have been to the ice? It is 5 or 6. It's called ice field. I'm not so sure, but don't know if it's one. Which the family owned and the family picture through it. I will tell you, when I heard ice cream came up with the world, it was one of the favorite things I ever did. It took hours to go through it, for the meeting of a 20-year-old and owned it. The reason why I bring that up is because this Westtown area in Chester County became a center for exporting. This was a huge business. I think it was our #2 industry at the time. It was America's #2. And that enabled us to put ice onto those Wilmington and eventually send meat out to some markets. Okay, sorry for the digression, but please visit there. Saturday mornings only. Okay, next. A factory was built in the very, very early 1800s, right here, in front of where the Amish market was. And one of the earliest machines we made was a grain willer. It was actually made for corn willing. So the term that we still use today to separate the wheat from the chaff, this is literally what that did, separated the wheat from the chaff. And what that meant was so we're farmland. We all, if you live in Westtown, there's pretty much a 99.5% chance that you live on what was once open space and what was farm. We grew a lot of corn here, very high quality. And what you would do is you would put the corn in, you would lift up the lid, put in the corn, and the corn would have a lot of chaff. It would have parts of it that you couldn't eat. So you would turn the crank, which moved the fan. It blew air over it. And because chaff is lighter than grain, it would exit out through the top. You can imagine that was an extremely messy event, a bad job, probably not good for people with asthma, but it would blow this stuff all out there. And then what would be left was what you could sell and what you could eat. So we were one of the first producers in this area of machines like this. Next slide. Benedict Darlington, we'll hear about that family in a minute, but in 1820, he then built a weaving factory on East Wilmington Road near here, and he had a general store. He had a wheelwright shop, which we'll talk about. He was associated with the wheelwright shop, which was owned by Joseph Britton, and we also had a general store there. So this shows you the capital requirements for a year for the Westtown weaving company. You can see we had 11 men, 5 women, and 5 children. And since the annual wages for the entire factory was $3,120, it means that the average wage of an employee was $148 and change annually. Whether that was a lot or a little at those days, I really couldn't say. And they made all, as you can see, they turned the cotton into all sorts of things. Okay. There was a financial panic, which we'll discuss later on, but that wound up closing the factory. There were other factories also on that property by Joseph Britton. Joseph Britton, along with a partner, invested in all sorts of factories, and he was the fellow who owned and developed a quarry out there. And he was an inventor as well. So the first thing he did was he established a factory and didn't really know what to make, so he licensed a washing machine from England, which is called Beats Washer, the celebrated Beats Washer. And what you would do is you would turn a crank. Again, we like people to turn cranks to get stuff to work. And you can see the inside of it looks remarkably like a modern washing machine anyway. So the whole idea was you would, by hand, beat the dirt out of the clothing. This instead said, well, by turning the crank, you could clean your clothing that much quicker. And that was very successful. And then he decided that he would not license anymore, but keep the money for himself, and thought the next greatest thing to make might be clocks. And to make the gearing and almost everything in the clock out of wood, not out of metal. So we didn't have the technology here to do that kind of metal work. There's a little bit of it in New England and a lot of it in Europe. So what he did was Britain hired 3 clockworker makers from Connecticut, brought them to Westtown to build clocks here, and made a business out of selling clocks. Next slide. Near the factory then was a general store. So this was our first general store. Somebody could actually go in and get all kinds of different things. And these are examples of the kind of stuff they would sell. They would sell liquor, very popular, as you can imagine down here, shoes and clothing. It was very easy to buy gunpowder because explosives and gunpowder were made right down Wilmington Road in Wilmington. And so there are some images of some of the explosives that were commonly used, and they would be used locally, obviously for guns, for hunting, but they were also used for getting rid of some of the massive rocks that we're kind of famous for having here. But Jeff, good morning. Come on in. No, it's a talk. Just a talk, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that's all it is. A few pictures here. Why not? Why not? You're welcome. Um, what we here are, I looked up what was sold there at that time. What were the most popular foods to buy in these taverns? And these are two things that I thought were pretty interesting. One was called jumble cookies. Those jumble cookies are all cookies, but they're not sweet. They back then and some enthusiasts of Revolutionary War era foods will still make those things. The other thing, the thing on the right, which looks kind of like an old meatloaf, is actually called a pepper cake. That was the most popular cake of the period. Something that makes not a lot of sense to us nowadays, although I'd love to try it sometime. It Pepper cake. It's a pepper cake. And the reason why it's called pepper cake is because it is loaded with black pepper. So it's a combination of, so it's described as dense as a fruit cake. It has chopped up fruit, dried fruit that's in it, just like a fruit cake. And it has molasses. So it, kind of makes sense. But then it's filled with black pepper. And for whatever reason, people loved it. And you would, rather than make it yourself, you would go out to the general store here on the corner to buy it. By the way, it was notorious for keeping for half a year without and without refrigeration in those days. If you could buy stuff that you can keep around for that length of time, then why not? And believe me, I've had some fruitcake myself that I'm sure has been kept for at least half a year. It tasted that way to me. Yes. Uh, I do not know. The recipes I looked at didn't say that, but it is entirely possible. It kind of makes sense to me. I think it makes sense. Okay, Darlington. Who are they? Where'd they come from? So the Darlington family immigrated from England, uh, and they had so the research. I love the research on this family in here in Westtown. It says uh, Thomas and Mary. I'm sorry, the Abraham and Susanna had at least 14 children. They all say that at least 14 children. So they don't know exactly how many they had, but we know there were at least 14. Here's a list of the ones that we know about. And then on the next slide, um, here, so of course, in those days, the ones that they really cared about were the men, and there were 9 of them. So I found this image at the History Center. That is Thomas Darlington. Doing research on Thomas Darlington is a little bit of a pain because his dad had that name. And every time you look it up, you have to really look hard to make sure it's the Westtown Darlington that you're looking at and not the one that was born outside in other parts of Chester County. Um, the Darlington family became very wealthy and very powerful. And anyone who lives around here knows that by traveling around up to Westchester or anywhere else, there's Darlington Road. There's Darlington Road right up here, right on 202, Darlington Avenues. There's Darlington buildings, etc. Because this family wound up starting so many different businesses throughout Chester County. But here, we're concerned with Thomas. So there is that rather stern looking Thomas who was very smart. He was quite an entrepreneur. Thought a lot of himself, perhaps for good reason, but you'll see later on what he did. And he was smart enough to marry Britton. So the other big magnate in the area, Joseph Britton, by marrying the daughter, it's kind of like back in Europe where you would have one king's daughter marry another country's son, it really made for a very powerful family in this area. So in doing research in over at actually at the county building, I came across the actual papers. This is the application that Thomas Darlington made to the courts to open a tavern here at the corner of 202 and Street Road. And they're all very floral. They all, he hopes that he will be favored with a license. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, for them to approve your application meant nothing other than to write the word allow. As far as the law was concerned, go to town. You can sell liquor and serve food and do whatever you want. So that's how, in 1823, Thomas Darlington acquired that building and started his businesses. Okay, next slide. He had many different jobs and businesses, and he was assigned postmaster. So federal government decided that he would be our local postmaster, and the post office here. Now, he decided to however, this is not Westtown Township. He was normal. I'm going to go to Westtown. Yeah. Here, I believe that the normal was on northern side. Now, what we call Westtown Township. Since we had that problem, the government had a problem. So we are in the very notable position of having short range of office. But instead, the Westtown football. What is? It's something I find endlessly amusing. Thomas Stevens was one of the postmasters at one time. So next slide. This shows, okay, so this is something it's amazing the records that we keep over at the county building. And this shows that at one point later on, after Darlington didn't own the tavern anymore, other people would apply the same way. We'd write that piece of paper and can I become the guy to sell booze? And somebody was turned down in Westtown because he was declared a lunatic. And it's said that at the time, often it would be either disgruntled members of the family or others who would say, somehow swear out some affidavit saying this person's a lunatic in order to prevent them from having certain jobs. So was this guy really crazy or not? I don't know. But there, as you can see, we have entire files of these people that, and we group together lunatics and habitual drunkards because, after temperance came along here, we were a very strong temperance area, Quaker background, that became a popular thing here. Interesting enough, by the way, the Darlington family had a Quaker background. They had a very strong Quaker background. And when they came here, they were attracted to this area because of our that's where Quakers came from. That's we had the Quaker school, which we still have. But some of the sons kind of drifted away from that because they were a little bit more interested in money. Because as a member of the Quaker community, you really shouldn't be running a tavern that served. So he kind of moved away from that bit so that he could open that business. Okay. Yes, Woodward, 1867, pretty late, was refused the license as he is declared. So next, there was an owner in 1843 took over over that building, and this fellow, Donald H. Taylor, was an amateur sculptor of some talent. Good morning, some talent, some renown, and he bought that tavern. He was a very strong member of the Whig Party, which at the time was one of our two major parties. There was the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. The Democratic Party was first formed, frankly, to defend slavery. It existed only mostly to defend state rights and to promote slavery. And the Whigs were both abolitionists, they were against slavery, but they were also against expansion. So one of their key elements was they felt that America was big enough and that we shouldn't be involved with anything overseas, and that we should stop moving west and just worry about where we are now and not start buying more of the United States and taking over that land. And so this is so that building became the Whig headquarters for this area, which later evolved into the Republican Party. And at the time, Henry Clay, who is seen there, was their big hero. There was an associated club called the Garfield and Arthur Club. And there were 50 members who would attend regularly over at that building. The sculptor, David H. Taylor, so admired Henry Clay that he carved Henry Clay's image in the side of that building. So there was a tiny image, and I tried to find something that was worth reproducing, but I just cannot get a good enough photo of it. It's way up top. And but he carved a picture of Henry Clay in the side of the building. Later, when the Whigs turned into Republicans, Taylor stayed with the group, and he then decided to name his dog Lincoln after the famous president, and then went back up and carved a picture of Lincoln the dog next to Henry Clay. So you rarely will see a strange combination like that. By the way, the Whigs had they had some presidents: William Harrison, John Taylor, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Millard Fillmore. That name that people love to make fun of. They were all Whigs. But Clay lost to James Polk, who was a huge expansionist, and that's where we got the Mexican War and acquired all sorts of land out west. In 1886, a fellow named Frank Duttenhofer, a lot of Germans in this area, as you can imagine, he leases the tavern as a truck market, meaning they were selling just fruits and vegetables, non-perishables. And eventually that turns into an antique shop. Then, so what happened with the whole tavern thing, right? There were so many taverns being owned, and all of a sudden, the inn is not a tavern anymore, it's a hotel or it's an inn. And the reason for that is that Chester County was one of the strongest temperance areas on the East Coast. So you can imagine the Quakers had something to do with it, but also in Westchester, there was a huge temperance league, the Chester County Temperance Society, one of the earliest, dating from the 1820s. That's Mary Ingram Still. She's from Westchester. She was born a Quaker. Her ancestors served in the Revolution, so she had a very good resume. She was an advocate of suffrage as well. So she was a big wheel in the suffrage and the temperance movement. And in 1889 to 90 was an officer of the Temperance League. From 1854 to 80, there were 14 different proprietors of the inn. And in 1881, the owner, John Noble, decided he would refuse to sell liquor forevermore. And it was bad for us. We shouldn't have it. The store shouldn't be selling it to people. And that was the end of that. And so that's how it turned just into first an inn and then to different kind of retail stores. For a long time, that building was an antique, sold antiques. Some people didn't call them antiques, but the people who sold them called them antiques. Okay, next slide. Believe it or not, if anyone here is familiar with the Westtown train station, which is now, you know, where a wonderful artisan works and does all kinds of great stuff. But believe it or not, I found this, I don't know where I found it, somewhere, but that's the Westtown train station. So that's 1858. Originally it was called the Street Road Station. That's where it was on. Eventually we wound up calling it the Westtown Station because it served Westtown. Even though it was never in Westtown, it still isn't, but it served the population of Westtown. And just have a look at the number of people inside it. That's what Train Station does so well. Darlington Corner is such an important business area that we're going to develop the Wilmington Reading Railroad. We're going to go from Reading, come through Darlington Corner, connect it to the train station to go down to Wilmington. Why this idea though? The idea was at that time in the 1850s, just before the Civil War. And by the way, this is there's a piece but at that time in Europe, especially in England and here, people were so enthralled with the possibility of getting somewhere in a couple hours or a couple days that railroads were the way to go. And that's when, of course, we were building the Intercontinental, the Continental Railway. And railways were companies came up all over the country. This company was formed to raise $60,000. That's a picture of the certificate that you would raise money. You'd raise a $50 certificate so that you would be part owner of this railroad, which would make you a multimillionaire in no time. So there are people all over the country and in Europe selling people on all these railroads. If you take a look at the ideas behind that, basically, if you were to look at a map, what the railroad law and we think it's something that there are codes but don't worry, we're trying to move ahead. Don't worry. Turned out long term, it was not a good idea to buy that $50 certificate. Because of what happened. Let's see. There was also going to be a trolley line. which I think I showed later on. So unfortunately, there was a financial panic in 1873. It was the longest depression in U.S. history. And these are photos of a bank run on Wall Street, of people trying to get their funds. And the railroads were a very large part of that. And here is a cartoon of a destitute person sweeping up worthless rail stocks that the country had invested in. And what happened was, of course, the trolley line never happened, that train line never happened, but also, unfortunately, so many people were put out of work. It affected the business of Westtown, and our ability to sell livestock. So we had livestock brokers. So you could the drovers could come here and leave the livestock. We had brokers that would then say, "Oh, okay, I know who will want this. I know who will want that," and that was the job in Westtown. And all the other stores, almost all of them, almost all the factories closed within 1 year, within 6 months actually, because of how bad this financial panic was. And it really changed the Darlington corners, and it makes you wonder what would have happened had that not been the case, had this been able to grow and we had more factories or more stores or whatever there, but that didn't happen. So we kind of had to start over from scratch. Next slide. This was the trolley that was planned, and these were the trolley stops. You can see, and that is the actual trolley that ran along the center of Westchester Pike, right, Route 3. So that ran up the middle. Dave is the expert on that. And they decided that the trolley had been doing so well before that financial panic, they would put a trolley line that would go from Westchester, Darlington Corners, Dilworth Town, then an area called Eland that would end at the connect with the Delaware border, and that's how people would go up and down. But that too collapsed, and financially was impossible to do. And it ran out of funds. Okay, next slide. For a while, during the 50s, they were kind of notorious for that. In 1854, there was so much commercial traffic that had been running up and down what at the time was called Wilmington Road, that they decided it would be a good idea to pave the road with wooden planks. We had a little article about that in the Gazette a while ago. And they paved it with planks, which the Romans had done. This is something that's been done for a long time because it was a quick and easy and cheap way to put a smooth surface down. Unfortunately, that smooth surface didn't last very long. So you know what the weather was like here, the snows and the rain. You remember rain, we used to have that. And so what would happen is the planks would rot, some of them would break, and then the horses that were going up and down, it would then get hurt because it was more dangerous than just a little hole in a dirt road. So that wound up being pulled up. But then we also changed, somebody had a great idea to maintain that road and change it from Wilmington Road to Wilmington Pike, because why not charge people money? So if you were going to go from Westchester down to Delaware, we'd get a piece of that action. A company, private company, had done it just at the turnpike. And this shows how much it would cost. And that cost that one that federal was horrible. So they had a team of 4 horses. Where the money nothing don't worry, cars for decades. They go up and down for no charge. And they just hated this. People would go up and in the middle of the night and push the toll booth the station over. The guy couldn't go in and collect his money. And but that's now we still call it Wilmington Pike. So we eventually had to put someone so this is what this day is but eventually it would be. And then we, of course, they replaced the wood with crushed macadam. That's an image from an 1860 map, and you can see here that now here. That's what they say. I'm anxious to try it. Okay, next slide. So this is how big we were. We keep talking about this big. This is not this far. Next thing. Next slide. Okay, here's Joseph Britton. In 1879, a stonemason who worked at the quarry, his name was William Cobra, built a serpentine house on Wilmington Road, which is still here, right? No, that's one. Third floor down. Okay. It was a gorgeous example of serpentine stone. And Darwin Highfield builds a blacksmith shop with 2 forges on the east side. So on the east side of Street Road, this fellow Darwin Highfield, which we'll talk about for a minute, builds a very large blacksmith shop, 2 forges and 5 employees. That's how important that was there. The association with the quarry was very important. Obviously, you could drive all over the area here and see this gorgeous green serpentine stone. Called serpentine because when you put your hand on it, it feels like the skin of a snake. And it's unusual. It's only quarried in very few places in the United States. And turns out long-term is not the very best building material. Does not hold up that well to corrosive elements. but we still have wonderful examples of it here. In 1891, Britain asked Highfield to move. So Britain lives in this house, which still is here, and rented part of the house to this fellow, Darwin Highfield, who wanted to be a blacksmith. He had a blacksmith shop next to it. So that big open space that you see there, there was a big blacksmith in this shop. There was a large building, and half of it was a shop, half of it was a factory. The factory starts doing so well in his various enterprises, including farm implements, that Britain said, "You got to move out of here. I need to enlarge my factory." So Darwin moves across the street, where the next to where the inn was, builds a new blacksmith shop, and the factory then is doubles its size to make farm implements. And our first reported crime occurs in the new blacksmith shop. His shop is burgled and people steal his tools. And that's the first crime report that I can find in Westtown to this day. Next slide. Okay, Joseph Britton, as I said earlier, invented stuff. He invented a type of corn cultivator. It was called the Joseph Britton celebrated corn cultivator, and he patented it around 1880. This is his patent drawing that he had drawn, and it represented a key innovation in American agricultural technology. The cultivator was one of the earliest examples of what would later evolve into the modern row crop cultivator. The machine was lightweight. It had adjustable elements that could adapt to varying soil conditions and row widths, which made it particularly practical for small to medium-sized farms. Patented it and wound up selling that patent off. Okay, next. That is okay. So that is an atlas of Chester County, and it lists the jobs that people had. So the quarry, for some reason, was called originally the Birmingham Serpentine Stone Quarries. I suspect he had his offices in Birmingham, even though the quarry was here in Westtown. So his foreman, Alfred Darlington, that Darlington name again, is listed on this atlas, and it was supposed to list everybody's job. To give you an idea of what an ambitious person might be employed in at the time, this atlas lists him as the foreman of the quarry, a stonemason, a teacher, a carpenter, and he was our local undertaker. And that's from the 1873 Bridges and Whitmer Atlas. So I consider that fellow a pretty ambitious guy. Next slide. So the location of the blacksmith shops. We had wheelwrights, which were a little different, and blacksmith shops. You can see the location of the tavern, where the wheelwright shop was, and that sad house on 202 that one, sometimes had a tree on it and will certainly not be there much longer, right? But shows you where the activity was. And some of us on the Historic Commission are interested in whether we might be able to do a little dig sometime where the wheelwright and blacksmith was, to see if we might find some stuff buried in the building that might be of interest to the community. Next. Okay, so here is Darwin Ritchie, nicknamed Daddy Highfield. That photo on the left is in our history book. I had never seen the photo on the right. I found it over at the History Center, and there was Darwin in front of his Westtown blacksmith shop, showing a horse. And in the photo on the left, the kids that you see in the window are DeWitt Wright, Horace Wright, and Norris Highfield. That photo was taken in 1905. So you can see that even in 1905, we still had blacksmiths. Somewhere, if Darwin's anvil is up there somewhere, we don't know exactly where it is. He built he built his new place where the Luke oil station is. Oh no, I'm sorry, no, that's him. He built a new one where the Luke oil station is. He wound up renting half of his space to a wheelwright named Caleb Watson. So next slide. Talk about wheelwrights. So wheelwright differed from a blacksmith. The blacksmith obviously worked and formed tools, but wheelwrights were extremely important in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, and even into the 1900s, because these were people who were expert in creating wheels for your wagon, which broke often enough and were pretty expensive. So the knowledge that was required to build and install all those wooden spokes and to cover the rim with steel, metal, rather iron, which you would get from the blacksmith next door conveniently, improved your wagon. So you could bring a wagon there that wasn't performing well. I want to be able to get to Wilmington or Philadelphia quicker, and they would be able to accommodate you. So we had two wheelwrights right here in Darlington Corner. Next slide. Believe it or not, this is from the American Republican. It's a popular paper. Late 1800s, there was a write-up of the fox hunt from Darlington Corners. And you can see what happened to that, unfortunately, to that fox who wound up getting into Westchester and into somebody's kitchen. That's the big Catholic school that's up there on right there in Westchester. And that is a photo of a Westchester fox hunt. So we were sort of coming up in the world financially, and this was a popular area to have fox hunts. And you can imagine what 202 or Wilmington Pike was like at the time when you could run up 202 chasing a fox. And that's exactly which I found pretty fascinating. Okay, so in the tradition of the farm markets, one of the longest running stores at Darlington Corners was the Bartram store, called Bartram's Corners. When no one knows exactly when it opened. They think it was around 1928, but it might have been 1932. What was around 1930 on the southwest corner where the CVS is. Morris Bartram died in 1943, but his son, J. Hibbert Bartram, he moved the store to the northeast corner and enlarged it and ran it forever. Apparently, people loved shopping there, except in the wintertime because they had no heat. They never put heat in the building. And people found it inconvenient. Eventually, it burned down somehow. I don't know how without heat. Something must be smoking. But you can see, it's one of the areas. a local market, which just modified them a little bit. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to wind up with my subtitle for the talk was Traders and Trouble. We're going to wind up now. In doing research, I was a little shocked at the stuff that I found. And some of this is coming from local papers, some of it even published. And then, I think the corn stalk off the how about exactly what was going on with her, but the Daily Village Record reported that Ann Easter, known as a mad woman, a local Westtown mad woman, attacked people at Darlington. She was eventually arrested. So she was arrested by the constable of Westchester, taken to Westchester, and put in jail. She put the nippers on her. She then escapes from jail and attacks people in Westchester with rocks. Okay. So here's the confusing thing. No, don't go there. Here, this is that there is another that is famous as an influential Quaker minister. So she visited meeting houses all around. She preached at the Black congregation, the AME, that used to be over on Shiloh Road. It's gone now, but she was famous as an abolitionist. She was very influential in throughout Westtown, and she has exactly the same name. So when you do research on her, and I'm looking up this mad woman, Ann Easter, but then she's talking at churches, you can imagine how difficult that was in the beginning to figure out who was what. And so I had AI draw a picture of her because I didn't know how else to. And it did Chat GPT did a pretty good job. But it absolutely could be. And you can see when you look at these old newspaper accounts, there's no TV, they didn't have radio, so these things get to be very, very, very kind of a little easier. And honestly, sometimes it's a shock. So now we move to Westtown. This actually prompted a book. So on October 10th, 1900, farmer John Sharpless, that's the name that you hear all the time. There's Sharpless, there's Sharpless Works, Sharpless Streets. By the way, Sharpless is a mispronunciation and a misspelling of the name Sharple, who came over from England, a very wealthy, important family. We corrupted it the same way as we do the Pennsylvania Dutch and everything else, and turned it the name Sharpless. So on October 10th, 1900, farmer John Sharpless was murdered. He was descended from the English Sharpless family. He was wealthy and he was well known, one of the wealthiest farmers in the Westtown area. He was murdered in his barn, his head crushed by a heavy object. No motive was established, and the crime remains unsolved to this day. The murder was notorious and reported in the New York Times. The article in the New York Times picks up the full side. This was a good question. October 10th, 1900. 1900 was a bad day for West. Um, this is the murder that historians tend to know more about on May 23rd, 1900, at the Minshaw Sharpless Farm. So Sharpless comes up. Sarah Morrison, wife of William, was murdered. At about 4 p.m., she was discovered by the farmer's father, James, who called him in from the field. So James was 80 years old, and in the newspaper reports, and the newspaper reports are enormous. This was such a notorious story. It hit the Inquirer, got everybody all excited about it. It's kind of like the O.J. Simpson of the time. Like everybody would know what was going on. It's murder. And the 80-year-old father went to Britain for about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. One report said he went there to sleep. Later in the day, another article, he's changed his tune and said, I went there to go fishing. I didn't know the fishing. And so who knows? Some of this stuff started. So a woman was discovered in her home in a pool of blood. And all around the room, the room was described as having the furniture all disheveled. But upon investigation, the constable said, well, the furniture was all neatly stacked up, and she had some brooms and mops, and she was really cleaning the house. So nobody was doing, and why would you come and murder somebody and move all the furniture all over the place? That doesn't make any sense. The other problem is that nothing was gone. She was not molested. Nothing was stolen. She was just killed. The reports are very strange. People say that there were people walking by who said that this area, in this farm, there's a section called Woodward's Hollow on the property. I can't find it myself. I'm sure if we do a little research, we can find it. It was right off of Wilmington Pike. So by then it was called the Pike. And it was said that the furniture was in disarray and that a club was found beside her. There are other reports that say that was not the case and that there was some like fireplace implement that was found. With investigation, hired hands said that they heard her yell at 2 p.m. They heard her screaming, "Get out of here!" And they said They thought chicken or a dog had gotten into the house while she was cleaning and she was chasing them out. Um, Other people in Westtown said that they had seen three quote unquote suspicious looking tramps prowling earlier. You can see how colorful the newspapers were. Tramps were here and they must have been prowling the area. You can't be unknown to Westtown and go for a walk. You're prowling, all right? And then of course we called them hobos. They said that at the time. We had hobos. Um, and they actually found these guys in Philadelphia. They arrested them. But there was no evidence to prove that they had done it. And also, without any theft or molestation, why would they have done it anyway? They then arrested the father because he found her, so nobody else has been around, so he must have done it. Why? I don't know, but the public will feel better if we arrest them. So they do. There's no evidence. I mean, there's no fish at the quarry that could prove that he was there, but they couldn't keep him, so they had to let him go too. So even though there were warrants sworn out for various people, nothing could happen. So notorious was this crime. Next slide. This will show where. So excited. Hi. What's the one page with two holes? While it was happening for it. I'm not going to go back to follow. Here, this is why you on one thing. The big problem higher. Hey, there is this big deal outside. He sure was fine. Already. When here, going to farmland, I not that update so that happens here in Westtown. And so that's our little story of Darlington School. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Any questions? I probably can't answer. Yeah. Most of it shows that it was here because remember, New Street existed during the Revolution, and there's been speculation that the British troops walked along it. I mean, that's not speculation. Speculation is that it went walked on the village, but Um, it's possible in those photos you saw when they straightened it out, it's very possible that they moved it west to do that, but looks like it, at least from Revolutionary days, it was pretty much here. That's a good point. Yeah, and maybe that's it. Right, right. That and that absolutely could be. It burned down in but it went through in the early 50s. They actually was built in 1990. So I think this people tell me in the 1950s they did it. So, yeah, yeah. Then it burned down. In my case, that the position Yeah. Wonderful. And the township decided to carve that land out away from the grant. So that purchase is being made by the township, which means you bought it. Thank you very much for your help. And that also means that that property and the building would be open for all kinds of interesting uses going forward. I've heard people talk about everything from restaurants to a local history center, or what. I don't know. I think that I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that the township is going to be very interested in hearing from you and other residents about what you think would be a great idea to do with that building. It's everyone's been a little worried about it because PennDOT is going to be putting in turning lanes on 202, going to take up quite a bit of land. And a study was done to determine whether that building would be in any kind of danger. They say that it'll be safe, but of course, PennDOT is the one who did the study. But we hope that that's the case. But as you can see from our little talk, there's a great deal of history there. And what you can also see from the talk is that there's even more history that's gone. So, so we on the historical commission are doing whatever we can, try to preserve the memory and sometimes even a building of our history. That's why we're here. So your ideas should be given to that supervisor and his uh, other members of the board. So thank you very much for coming, folks, and I hope you enjoyed it. Okay.